welcome back to Dave's Gone By on this Saturday morning. You know, when I first got this fellow on the phone that we will be talking to, I said, okay, do you have any questions about the interview? Do you have any thoughts or ideas? Because this man has spent years and years in music and also in nature and conservation, two very different topics, both of which are going to be really fun to talk about. And I said, okay, any questions, anything? And he said, no, let's rock and roll, baby. And from almost anybody else, that would really be almost kind of lame or cheesy or hippie-ish. But from Chuck Leavell, it's perfectly understandable and reasonable, because this man has made rock and roll music not only by himself, and not only with the Allman Brothers, but for almost 30 years with a little outfit called the Rolling Stones. He's been their lead keyboard player for more than 25 years. He was a head person in the Allman Brothers for a while as well. Plus, as I said, he's got solo work done, and he's written books, including his autobiography, Between a Rock and a Home Place, and his conservatorially oriented book, Growing a Better America, which is all about smart growth from Evergreen Arts Books. He's Chuck Leavell. He's on the phone. He's with us in our very natural neighborhood. Welcome, Chuck.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Dave. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Well, thank you so much, and so great to be here. I mean, it is just so weird, because I was going on YouTube for the past few days and looking for Rolling Stone stuff and clips, and just like, oh, okay, you know, there's Mick, and there's Keith, and there's Charlie, and that guy at the keyboard. Him! That's you! Man, I'm talking to you! So, we will, I promise, get to the conservation stuff, but you gotta tell the story of how you got to the Stones. I mean, I think it was from Ian Stewart, their previous keyboard player, or was it more than that?
Well, that was certainly a big part of it, and many of your listeners probably know about Ian Stewart. He was kind of an unsung hero of the Stones, actually a founding member of the Rolling Stones. Great piano player. He was eventually sort of escorted out of the band, if you will, by an early manager that felt like he didn't look like the part, and they had, you know, too many anyway. So but Stu, rather than, you know, go off angry and mad, he took it quite well, and he stayed on, still played on the records, and he also became a logistician for the band in the early days, helping to set up the hotel rooms for the tours and looking after the equipment and so forth. So he was a really important person for the Stones. And he was my first contact. Mm-hmm. He called me in 1981 saying the band was interested in me doing an audition. They had heard about me. They had heard about my work with the Allman Brothers Band and other recordings that I had made. And so, you know, this came up, by the way, on very short notice in 81. I mean, literally, one day I get the call that the Stones are looking for me, and the next day I'm on a plane, you know.
Well, can I ask, was it because Stewart knew he was ill already, or why did they just needed a second keyboardist?
Well, Stu was a really interesting character. You know, he was very peculiar in as much as that he didn't like to play ballads or slow songs. He only wanted to play rock and roll stuff or boogie stuff. He was not interested in songs that had minor chords. I can hear Stu say now, don't like slow songs, they're boring. And he would say, don't like minor chords, they sound Chinese.
I guess Moonlight Mile was not his favorite Stone song, though.
No, it's so funny. So he only played on things that he cared to play on, and that was the way it worked. And of course, your listeners know very well that through the decades, there's been many great keyboard players that have contributed to the Stones. I mean, everybody from Billy Preston to Jack Nitzsche to the great Nicky Hopkins and Ian McLagan, and so, you know, there's been a lot of players, but, you know, I have been there, as you mentioned earlier, for 30 years now, and I was very privileged to know Ian Stewart, and he was very much like a big brother to me. learned a lot from Stu. He did have a fantastic boogie-woogie style, and he turned me on to names like Albert Ammons and Meade Lux Lewis and James P. Johnson and Pete Johnson and Montana Taylor, all of these great historic boogie-woogie players. And so I began to study them, and I began to work with Stu, and I learned his style as best I could. And then, tragically, in 1985, Stu had a heart attack and passed away. And so, to some degree, it was natural for me, since I had studied all of that and worked with him so long, to kind of step in that role.
And so you did in 1982, I guess, was when you really became the keyboard player for the Stones.
That's right. Yeah, it was 82, and then Stu passing away in 85.
And People magazine once called you the sixth Rolling Stone, which is kind of it's like the Klaus Voormann of the Beatles. It's a pretty amazing title, and yet you're totally cool not being per se one of the Rolling Stones. You're. I mean, how do you feel about your position there? Did you ever think, well, maybe?
No, listen, I'm very, very comfortable. The joy of my career, Dave, has been working with so many different artists.
Sure.
Yes, I've been with the Stones since '82, but let's face it, they don't necessarily work on a constant basis. So there's long gaps where there's no Stones activity. As a matter of fact, there's been no activity now for 5 years. The last show we did was August of '07, and so that gives me the opportunity to work with a number of different artists. Recently recording with John Mayer on his new record that'll be out this month. Gives me the opportunity to do the solo records that I love doing, and you were kind enough to mention Back to the Woods, my latest one. And, I get up to Nashville occasionally and work with artists there, Leanne Womack, Miranda Lambert, and some other great country artists that I enjoy. So, there are four Rolling Stones is the bottom line here. Mick, Keith, Charlie, and Ronnie. Those are the Rolling Stones.
Right.
But, I've been part of that band now for 30 years, and it's been a joy, and I'm very comfortable and appreciative of my role with the band.
Did you read Keith Richards' autobiography, A Life?
I absolutely did. It's a fantastic read.
Yeah, I read it too. Any corrections, any thoughts, your basic...
Oh, Keith is a blatantly honest individual.
Oh, yeah.
He holds nothing back, and certainly that's his privilege to do so. And, I think, for me, a lot of the interesting reading of that book was what went on in the very early days, learning to play the guitar. I think it was his Uncle Gus. I had never heard Keith talk about that. And the early days of the formation of the Rolling Stones, when Ian Stewart put an ad in the paper for any interested parties that wanted to play the blues. And so when they first got together and started forming the band, their goal was to be the best blues band in London, and then eventually England and Europe as a whole. That was their goal. It wasn't to make songs like Satisfaction or Jumpin' Jack Flash or Start Me Up. It was to be a blues band. And I really enjoyed reading that part of the book.
Yeah, one of the things that absolutely shocked me, it's a little off topic, maybe a little bit, but, everybody thinks of Altamont as that turning point of the 1960s, and it was so horrible, and somebody died in the audience, somebody got stabbed, blah, 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 with the Hells Angels, and then you read Keith Richards' book, or in the early stages of when they were just becoming huge, and it happened very quickly. And he's writing about, they did concerts, and people were leaping off balconies, and girls were crushed, and trampled and stomped and died. And it's like, nobody says the 60s ended there. It was just such a shock to realize people were dying at Rolling Stones concerts in 1963.
Well, it's certainly not something that anybody, feels good about.
Well, no, but...
We never want anyone to get hurt. We want people to walk away feeling good and enjoying the music. But, he does talk about, those early days when the crush was on with it was Stones mania, just like Beatles mania happened. And it is interesting to read about those years.
Now, what were you doing in those years, before the Stones, before the Allmans? What was your your early life like? and then getting into music?
Well, I grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and I learned to play the piano from listening to my mother. I was the baby of the family, an older brother and older sister. So when, they were off in school and I was 5, 6 years old and my dad out working, oftentimes just me and Mom in the house. And I loved to listen to her play, and I'd tug on her skirt and get her to play. And, then she would get me up on the stool and show me a few things, sometimes leave me to my own resource to experiment on the instrument. And that's how I began to play the piano. So, that started at a young age for me when I was 6 years old.
What kinds of songs was your mother playing?
Well, they were elementary songs, what she got me to do. Now, she could read music quite well and would play out of songbooks and do whatever standards of the day were popular kind of thing. We're talking about in 1950, late 50s, 57, 58, 59. And, she loved Sinatra, and she loved Bing Crosby and those popular singers and artists of the day. But eventually, when I got older, I learned to play the guitar from my cousin, and then folk music hit the scene, and we used to play songs by Chad and Jeremy and Christy Minstrels and, Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul, and Mary, and that whole folk movement that was happening in the early 60s. And then, of course, eventually rock and roll hits the scene, and when I had my first band, which was called the Misfits, ISFITZ, we thought it was cool to have the C,
Yeah.
So anyway, we formed the Misfits, and it was quite a good little young band. I was 13 years old at the time. And we had a steady job playing the YMCA in Tuscaloosa. And then eventually the first television station came to Tuscaloosa and asked us to be a band for a Saturday morning show called Tuscaloosa Bandstand. So,
Tuscaloosa Bandstand, good Lord, okay.
Very cleverly titled after American Bandstand, of course. But, the point is, we were playing that British invasion music, Rolling Stones, Beatles, Zombies, Dave Clark 5. We were playing indigenous music of the South, soul and R&B, Sam and Dave, Wilson Pickett, Aretha Franklin.
And you were still on guitar, right, at this point?
I was playing mostly guitar, right. But because it was so unusual to have somebody that could play keyboards in a band, I occasionally would jump over and play a Farfisa organ or a Wurlitzer electric piano. Those were the instruments of the day. And then as time went on, there was more demand for me playing keyboards because of the fact that, nobody else, not many other guys gravitated towards that. Everybody wanted to be a guitar player, So I started gravitating more towards the keyboard and then just, stuck with it.
Well, also in a lot of the biomaterial that you have, that I've read about you, one of the key moments for you was also seeing someone live in concert.
Oh, yes, and that would be the late, great Ray Charles. Situation was that, I had created this interest in music, and we had some Ray Charles records in our house, especially the one that's called Modern Sounds and
Country and Western Music, oh yeah.
I Can't Stop Loving You, and those songs were on. But anyway, my sister had a date to go see Ray Charles at the Coliseum in Tuscaloosa. At this juncture, I was a little too young to be left at home. My parents had a date as well, so they encouraged my sister to take me with her and her date, and she graciously...
Oh, I'm sure her boyfriend really appreciated it.
Yeah, exactly. But they were cool with it, and when I heard that band, Dave, it was just mind-boggling. I mean, Ray, of course, one of the greatest artists of all time, but you had such a great band. Fathead Newman playing saxophone. You had the Raylettes. Billy Preston was in the band playing organ.
Good Lord.
It was just such a powerful band. I'd never seen anything like it, and I get chills talking about it right now. It just was so moving and powerful. And I left that concert having decided that's what I want to do. I'm not interested in being a lawyer or a doctor or anything like that. If I could ever be in a band anywhere near that dream came true for me when I got to play with Ray on a show that we did in Italy. I was in the band that was backing up a number of great artists. It was Ray Charles, it was Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, B.B. King was on the show. It was just an incredible show that we did, and I got to talk to Ray, meet him, and have my picture taken with him, and most importantly, to tell him what he meant to me as a piano player.
Do you remember what he said back?
Oh, he smiled that big old smile and laughed and threw his head back and said, "Well, son, I sure appreciate that." Put his arm around me, and we had a great picture taken together.
Oh, man. And then what about the other people at that particular concert? Did you any anecdotal memories of B.B. King, of Fats?
Well, I'll tell you one I didn't mention that was on that show was Little Richard. And Little Richard is from Macon, Georgia, where I live near Macon now and have for the last 30 years. And what was funny about it was that I knew his guitar player, who was also his musical director. It was a guitar player named Travis Womack from Alabama. And so in the rehearsal stage, I got to talk to Travis, and, we reconnected. And then, obviously, what happened was, there was a time, some downtime before the show, and so Travis had gone to Little Richard and said, "Hey, this guy that's playing keyboard, is from Macon, Georgia, and he knows all about you, and he knows some people that you know." And so the moment comes, and we're bringing Richard onto the stage, and we have this, what we call a vamp, we're just playing this over and over figure, and Richard is going up and down the stage, as he always does, and waving to the crowd, and woo, doing his Little Richard thing.
Yeah.
And then he walked straight up to me. I was standing up playing a keyboard. He walked straight up to me and looked me in the eye, and he said, "I didn't know you was from Macon, Georgia, honey."
Oh.
And so I almost wanted to stop the band and say, "Well, let's talk, man." We had a show to do.
Chuck Leavell, he is the author of the new book, Growing a Better America, from Evergreen Arts Books. You can also, get stories like those from his autobiography, Between a Rock and a Home Place. And let's see, and find out all about that at chuckleavell.com, which is, by the way, spelled Leavell, chuckleavell.com. Let's be fair. We'll get back to the music, but I do want to give you a chance to talk about the other side of your life, which is the nature, the preservation, the conservation, the greening of America. Take it from whatever tack that you like. Just go for it. Tell us what you do and why.
Well, I appreciate that, and it is equally a passion for me, just as music is. I guess the short of it is that my wife's family, and by the way, my wife Rose Lane and I have been married 38 years now, so when we began to date and eventually got married, I realized that her family comes from farming background. They've been connected to the land for generations as farmers, tending forest land, tending cattle and livestock and so forth. And so as we would spend time with her family, that ethic of stewardship of the land began to rub off on me. And then in 1981, her grandmother passed away, left 1,000 acres of land and what we call the home place, and which is the home that she used to live in. And we woke up literally one day to inherit not only the land, but the responsibility of caring for the land. And, I knew I wanted to do the right thing. I was not terribly experienced in this, so I went to the library and checked out books on land use. I went to other landowners and asked questions. I asked questions of her family, went to meetings and seminars, and I eventually enrolled in a correspondence course on land use when I was touring with the fabulous Thunderbirds in the early 80s. And so the culmination of all of this is that I was looking for a way to work with this land and still be a musician and follow my career. What happened was forestry fit that bill. If I was trying to engage in row cropping or cattle farming or livestock, that's a lot of day-to-day work. And one of the kind of aha moments I had, Dave, was reminding myself where that marvelous thing called a piano comes from. It comes from the resource of wood. And so many that trees and forests give us materials to make our books and magazines and newspapers and packaging products. They give us materials to build our homes and schools and churches. They provide home and shelter to all manner of wildlife. They sequester carbon, in this day when we're concerned with climate change. And, they clean our air and they clean our water. And I just became fascinated, and I began to study forestry, and then we began to manage our place, which started as 1,000 acres and now has grown to 2,500 acres, mainly for forestry purposes. So that's been the journey, and it's been an amazing journey, and I'm still a student of forestry and land use, and I'm still fascinated by it.
So can I ask, now that you've got 2,500 acres and you're saying that they're dedicated to forestry, what exactly does that mean? Does that just mean you monitor it, you make sure it's watered? Or you're not using it for lumber, so as opposed to, let's say, somebody who just has land and they're gardening and taking care of it, how is what you're doing different?
Well, what we term our land as is what we call a working forest. That means that, yes, we do harvest. We certainly do. There's no better feeling in the world than to know that the materials that our trees provide, to make books and magazines and newspapers, which, I love to read, and I've been fortunate to write some books as well, so that means a lot to me. The thought of our wood going to build somebody's first house or to renovate somebody's home. By the way, there's no greener building material known to mankind than that of wood. I mean, let's remember that we're talking about a renewable resource. Now we're talking about biomass for a renewable energy source. We talk about wind, we talk about solar, which are all very important in this day and time. But let's not forget about biomass, and wood can contribute to that. We manage for long-term forest usage. Look, everything has a life cycle, and it's certainly true of the trees that we grow. Now, let's also remember that trees are different across this country. What you have in northern Colorado is quite different from what we have in the southeast down here.
Sure.
We're primarily growing what we call southern yellow pine, loblolly pine, slash pine, longleaf pine, shortleaf pine. But the life cycle of our trees is probably, somewhere around 75, 80 years. And so when you consider that, if I put a seedling in the ground today, then I can expect somewhere around 12 to 15 years to get a first thinning, which will take, it's like weeding the garden. You're taking out the lesser trees to let the better trees grow. And so you do that first weeding of the garden somewhere in this part of the country around 15 years. You're going to go in maybe another 5 to 7 years later, and you'll start to get some smaller lumber products, 2x4s, 2x6s, that kind of thing. As time goes on, you get into saw timber, some nice wide boards that go up to 12 inches or more. And then eventually you get into plywood products, you get into telephone poles. And so it's a very interesting cycle. And again, it's a renewable cycle.
That's pretty cool. And of course, or I wouldn't say of course, but I assume that the planting cycles are all different, so that some trees were planted 5 years ago, some were 10 years ago, some you're just planting now, so that you're not completely using up, a few acres at a time. I really don't know how it works, but I'm assuming that's the way.
That's absolutely how it works here, and with most what we call, again, working forests. So, we may have a tract of land that's, let's say, 50 acres over here that's age 10 and just beginning to grow. We may have another 70 acres over there that's 20 years old, and over here we got some that are 50 years old, and so forth. So, there's no set, definite way that we choose to harvest. We choose when we think the time is right, and there's also market interests that we need to follow. But on average, I'd say every 2 to 3 years we're doing some kind of harvesting here. And then let's not forget that during this incredible cycle that we're talking about, 75, 80, even 100 years, these trees are sequestering that carbon. They're cleaning the air. They're filtering the water as it goes into our streams and rivers. It's providing listen, we have such an abundance of wildlife here. Black bear, white-tailed deer, wild turkey, quail. You think of all the songbirds, the little critters like raccoons and possums and squirrels. And, it's an incredible ecosystem. And, when you talk about trees and forests, you can't talk about that without talking about everything that grows within.
Wow. If you want to find out more about all of this, please get the new book from Chuck Leavell, Growing a Better America, from Evergreen Arts Books. Chuck Leavell, a conservationist, a preservationist, a forester, but also, as we were mentioning before, a musician. And we're going to go back to the music part of his career. We kind of left off when you were in your late teens and 20s and, still playing half the time guitar, but then seeing Ray Charles and getting into the keyboards. At what point did things become more professional for you leading up to the gigs with the Allman Brothers?
Well, that was a slow burn, if you will. I was always seeking better musicians to work with, and I guess we can cut to the chase when I guess it was 1969, I came over to Macon, Georgia. I had heard about Capricorn Records, and I took a tour of the city and of all the interests that were going on musically there, the record company, the studio, the booking agency, and I saw opportunity. And so I moved over in earnest in 1970 and began to work as a studio musician and working with various artists and bands. And then eventually in 72, I landed the position with the Allman Brothers Band after Duane Allman's tragic death in a motorcycle accident. And the band had already had some success. We knew, or they knew, that they did not want to try to replace Duane Allman. It would have been impossible to bring, I don't care what great guitar player you put into place, it wouldn't have been Duane. And so, the band took a different tack, and we had these jam sessions that went on, and it began to feel good. And so within a month or so of these jam sessions that went on down at Capricorn Studios, the band asked me to join, and I was very happy to do so.
And you were with them for about, 4 or 5 years?
It was a little over 5 years. The Brothers and Sisters record was the first record I did, which was a joy to make. Had songs like Jessica and Ramblin' Man and Southbound and Come and Go Blues that were all played on the radio back in those days.
Sure.
And still remains to be the best-selling record the band ever had. And then we had some live records, and then we had Win, Lose, or Draw record. And then, the band temporarily broke up in 76, and I formed a group called Sea Level. And we had 5 good years together. And then, fast forward to 1981 when the call came to audition for the Rolling Stones.
Wow. I want to, of course, get back to the Stones, but for fans of the Allman Brothers, I don't want to necessarily leave that so quickly. I mean, what was it like to be with that band when they were really on top of their game, at their very best, and selling the most records and having the best songs and assumedly getting along, and then being there for a band that was kind of crumbling from within? I mean, and especially since you were really, a lead in that band. I mean, was it drugs? What was it like?
Well, when I joined the band, I had barely turned 20 years old. So, you have to remember that I was a very young person. It was an incredible opportunity for me. I was focused on the music. I wanted to contribute to the band. I wanted to, do my best to take it in a direction that would make sense and that could take the band to a different space. And I think those things did happen, and I'm very pleased and happy and proud to have been involved with that. But let us not forget that when I came in, the band had been together since '69, so I think it had been 3, maybe 4 years already in place before I came in. And so by the time we came to the end of, it would have been 76, the guys were tired. There was a number of factors that weighed. Of course there was drug use, and there were arguments within the band about direction, and there was all of those things, which is not for those days and for that situation. But I think more than anything, the guys were just tired, and they felt the need to move on and do something different. And so, you know, at the time, we thought it might be a permanent breakup, but as it turned out, the band did reform somewhere around, I guess it was 78 or 9, and with different personnel. And I'm very pleased that they're still together today. And, you know, it was a real joy for me recently to go to the Grammys and to participate in receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award for the Allman Brothers. And, you know, there's been different formations of the band since the beginning, but I'm proud to have been a part of it, and I'm very, very glad that they're continuing on.
And I think what's nice is that in the span of your career, having been with them and with Sea Level and with these other permutations of bands, that you don't go into like this panic of, oh my God, the band's breaking up, I better keep them together because how am I going to pay the bills if this band breaks up? You always knew, I guess, that you could go be a session musician forever, do your own thing, and have, and basically have that lifeline no matter what.
Well, I think that's been the joy of my career, Dave, is that, I've been able to work with the Allmans, eventually with the Stones, and to play shows that have various artists on board. I worked with Eric Clapton for a couple of years. I had the privilege and honor of working with George Harrison. And so, if a musician has some success with one outfit or one artist or one band, that's great. But the joy of my career is being able to dance, if you will, with all these different partners. And you always learn something from one set of circumstances and can apply it to another and continue to grow and hopefully get better. And that's really been the joy of my career.
Well, totally. And by the way, the career we're talking about is that of Chuck Leavell. We have a couple more minutes left. If you'll give us a little more time, that'd be really great.
Okay, Dave. Yeah, I'm just off the scene here for a minute. I do have another call to make shortly, so maybe we can wrap up.
Do just a little bit more, because I love the anecdote stuff. Like a few years ago, I had Neil Innes on the show of Monty Python fame, and also a close friend, obviously, of George Harrison. And he had some great Harrison stories and anecdotes to tell. Do you? Any memories of working with him?
Well, I was so happy when Eric Clapton, who I was working with at the time, called to say, listen, we're going to back up George Harrison. Wow. I mean, I was a Beatles fan, of course, when I was young, and everybody had their favorite Beatle, and George was my favorite Beatle. I just liked the mysteriousness of the guy, and I loved his songs, and, he was maybe a little bit of the underdog, and all of those things attracted me to George, and, of course, his great musicianship. So, we did a tour of Japan, which was the last tour that George did. It was such an honor and amazing thing to play with him. He was the nicest guy on the planet. And not only such a great songwriter, singer, musician, but a great humanitarian. He was the first person to put together a major rock concert to benefit a humanitarian cause, and that would have been the concert for
Bangladesh, of course.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And, my memories of George is that he had the most wonderful smile and wonderful chuckle. He was a very funny person. He was so easy to be with. He was not pretentious. He loved people. I can't ever remember seeing him when he was depressed or down at all. He was always up and jovial and happy. And what a wonderful person to spend time with, when you a person as talented as he is and as so full of life at the time. It was just wonderful.
And what about Eric Clapton? Any anecdotes about him and playing with him?
Well, I had the joy of working on the Unplugged record with Eric. I worked with Eric for a couple of years. We did the 24-night series at the Albert Hall, live performance, and then, of course, the Unplugged record, which still stands as his best-selling record to date. And, well, let's see, I'll give you a little quick story. On the song Alberta, Alberta, at the end of the song on the record, Eric calls my name out. out. I guess he was happy with me, and you hear in his English accent, he says, Chuck Leavell. And so fast forward to before the tour for the Unplugged record, the record had come out, and I was setting up a little media tour of my own to do with conservation issues, tree farming, conservation, forestry. And I was on the phone to this woman setting up the details, and she said, I just got that Clapton record unplugged, and I love it. I just have to tell you. And I said, well, thank you so much. It was a great honor for me, yada, yada. And she said, I want you to know my son really likes the record, too. I said, well, that's nice. Thanks. I'm glad he does. And she said, you know that part where Eric calls your name out at the end of that song, Alberta, Alberta? I said, yeah, I can't believe they left it on the record, but I'm very pleased they did. And she said, well, my son really likes that part. And I said, wait a minute. First of all, how old is your son? She said, he's 6. I said, I'm thoroughly confused now. And I said, well, please tell me why your 6-year-old son gets excited when he hears Chuck Leavell. And she said, because he thinks Eric says chocolate milk.
That would excite me, too. I love chocolate milk.
But I had some great years with Eric. We're still very good friends. I see him occasionally, and who knows, maybe I'll get to work with him again someday.
That would be amazing. I know you have to leave in a couple of minutes, but I do want to get back also to the Rolling Stones as I'm talking to Chuck Leavell, and having read the Keith Richards autobiography, and also knowing that the tour that was supposed to happen this year isn't. I'm wondering what your insight is into the Keith and Mick relationship. I mean, you see them on stage, and you see how that all works, but are they really basically really separate entities? Not enemies, of course, but just like as soon as they leave the stage, they're off in two different worlds?
Well, you know, it's a multifaceted, multi-level relationship, isn't it? You know, and it's not unusual to compare it to a marriage. I've been married for 38 years, and, you know, in those 38 years, not every day was perfect for my wife and I. But, you know, what happens is, if you stick it out and you realize that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, well, then you get stronger as time goes on. And, you know, even if you have some difficult times, you move beyond them and you're stronger for it. And I think that's very much the situation with Mick and Keith. You know, these guys are brothers. They're joined at the hip. They've been together for over 50 years now. It's remarkable. They've written some of the greatest rock and roll songs ever known to mankind, and they realize that, and they realize that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that you know, they have a very special combination, a very special relationship. And you know, yes, they have somewhat separate lives. I mean, you know, it's not like they see each other every day, but when they do get together, it's all about the music, and I let the music speak for itself.
And when you're on stage, are your eyes on Keith? Are they on Charlie? I mean, where do you look, and whose responsibility is it to keep the band all together while you've got 6 or 7 or 8 musicians on stage?
Well, oddly enough, to a large part, they're looking at me.
Because you're a musical
my
director?
role with the band has kind of morphed through the years to be somewhat of, I don't know, you might call it assistant musical director. You know, when we do rehearsals, I keep meticulous notes on what we do, any arrangement changes. Did we have a horn part on this song? What was it? Did we have background vocals on that? You know, did we have any key changes? All of that stuff. And so consequently, you know, they've through the years kind of looked to me to give them a signal when the bridge of the song comes or when the ending might be coming up. I count a lot of the songs off because I know the tempo's what they need to be and all of that. So there's a lot of looks that go around the stage, you know, in all directions. Certainly I keep my eye on Mick. He's the lead vocalist, and he's out there entertaining the crowd, and, you know, you want to be cognizant of what he's doing. But, of course, Keith is, to me, if you want to ask who's the musical director, I'd say it's Keith. You know, he's kind of like the Count Basie of rock and roll. And so, you know, we look, it's a group effort. You know, we all look to each other and try to do the best we can.
Do you have a favorite Stones song? And it doesn't count by saying Back to Zero, because you have a you have a writing credit on that one.
Yeah,
which is pretty
I got
amazing.
a partial credit on one song. I wish we had the opportunity to do more. But Honky Tonk Women, I remember where I was when I first heard that song. I was living in Nashville. Our guitar player came into the house and said, "Man, I've got it." I said, "You got what?" He said, I was listening to the radio. The new Stone song came on. It's called Honky Tonk Women. I pulled over to the side to listen to it. I went straight to the record store and bought it, and here it is. And so we put that thing on the turntable and listened to it probably 100 times that day. We dissected it. We learned every part on there, the cowbell, the guitars, the vocals, the harmonies, the drums, the bass, and
it's a perfectly produced.
I just think it's one of the best constructed rock and roll songs ever.
Wow! And then now, of course, you get to be the guy on the.
I get to play it,
and you get to count it off with or maybe Charlie does because you need that.
It's actually Keith that starts that, but it's a real joy, and I just thank my lucky stars that I've been able to play with these guys this long.
Well, I thank my lucky stars that we have had the opportunity to chat with Chuck Leavell, the keyboardist for the Rolling Stones. He's also, of course, a solo artist. You can pick up his new CD, Back to the Woods. What is the label on that, by the way? Please remind me.
It's Evergreen Arts.
Oh, Evergreen Arts is also doing that, the CD, and the book, Growing a Better America. Can people get your autobiography there, too, between Rock and the Home Place?
Absolutely. And all of that's available on chuckleavell.com. And it's also, all of those things are available on most all the retail sellers like Amazon or iTunes or any of that.
So, Chuck Leavell, as we leave you, can you leave our audience with one bit of advice or thought about conservation and nature and preserving things in forestry? Anything that you can suggest that we can do that maybe we're not doing yet?
Well, yes. First of all, I want to tell you about our environmental website, the Mother Nature Network, which is mnn.com. We started this 3 years ago. We're now the most visited environmental website in the world. We're getting over 5 million hits a month. And it just says to me that people really do care about environmental issues. They want to learn how to live better, more responsibly, and we're trying very hard to be the best resource for that. So I'd encourage your listeners to check out mnn.com. But, one other thing when I get this question is to tell people, the simplest thing you can do, good for your health, good for the environment, walk. Walk. Get up off the duff and walk to work, walk to your office, walk to your school, walk, to your neighbor's house. Leave that car alone. It's not a big deal to get out and walk 2 or 3, 4, 5 miles. It's good for you. It's good for the environment. We have a terrible obesity problem in this country. If people walked more, I think we'd have a lot less of that.
Well, yeah, can't argue with that advice, and can't argue with the marvelous stories and thoughts of our guest, Chuck Leavell. Chuck, it's been an absolute pleasure. I wish you best of luck in your solo music, and of course, the music that you're making with that I forget their name, but that band you play with occasionally.
the Brits, yeah. Hey, well, thanks so much, Dave. It was a joy.
Thank you. Have a great one, man. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.